Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. He was born in poverty but dreamed of becoming rich and powerful. From stealing cars on the streets of Medellin to running the most dangerous drug empire in the world, his journey shocked the world. Pablo Escobar was called both the king of cocaine and the Robin Hood of Medellin. He built houses for the poor, but he also filled Colombia with fear, blood, and chaos. This is the story of how one man rose from nothing, became one of the richest criminals in history, and died on a rooftop, hunted by an entire nation. Behind the riches, behind the power, lies the bloody truth of Pablo Escobar, the man who ruled with silver or lead. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in a small town called Rio Negro, Colombia. His father worked as a farmer, and his mother was a schoolteacher. Pablo grew up in Medellin, a large city known for both its beauty and its crime. From the beginning, he was not like other children. He wanted more than what his family could give. He wanted money, power, and respect. As a boy, Pablo was clever, but he did not enjoy school. He often skipped classes and looked for quick ways to earn money. Some people said he was charming, while others thought he was dangerous even as a child. He liked to dream big, telling his friends that one day he would be rich and powerful. When he was a teenager, Pablo began with small crimes. He first stole tombstones from cemeteries and sold them to smugglers who reused them. Then he moved to stealing cars. The police knew his name, but they could not stop him. He was bold and ready to take risks. Every time he made money from crime, his hunger for more grew stronger. By his early 20s, Pablo was already feared by some people in Medellin. He was not just a thief. He was also violent when he needed to be. If anyone stood in his way, he threatened them or worse. In those years, Medellin was full of smuggling. Cigarettes, electronics, and cars were brought in illegally, and Pablo wanted his share of the business. He quickly learned that crime was not only about stealing, it was about controlling people. He formed a small gang with his friends, and together they made money from smuggling and robbery. He used both fear and friendship to keep his men loyal. If someone betrayed him, he punished them. If someone was useful, he rewarded them. This way, Pablo became a leader at a young age. The 1970s brought new opportunities for criminals in Colombia. A new drug was rising in the United States, cocaine. At first, it was used by rich people in parties. But soon, the demand grew rapidly, and drug traffickers realized there was a fortune to be made. Pablo heard about this business, and he understood that cocaine could make him richer than any stolen car ever could. Before cocaine, Pablo had already shown how ambitious he was. He once told his cousin that he wanted to be president of Colombia. But if politics was slow, crime was fast. The drug trade was like a shortcut to unlimited money, and Pablo wanted to take it. In these years, Pablo also showed how dangerous he was becoming. Stories spread about how he dealt with rivals. If someone crossed him, they were beaten or killed. If someone refused to join him, they disappeared. Medellin was a tough city, but Pablo was tougher. He created a rule that would define his life, plata o plomo, which meant silver or lead. Either you take his money or you face his bullets. But Pablo also knew how to win people's hearts. In poor neighborhoods, he gave out small gifts. He paid for food, football fields, and sometimes even medical care. Children saw him as a hero, not a criminal. People whispered his name with both fear and respect. To some, he was already becoming a Robin Hood figure. By the late 1970s, Pablo Escobar was no longer a small-time criminal. He had made enough connections to enter the cocaine trade. He built secret laboratories in the jungle where coca leaves were turned into cocaine powder. He found pilots willing to fly planes filled with cocaine into the United States. At first, it was small shipments, but soon it turned into tons of cocaine every month. The money began to pour in. Pablo was still young, but he was already living like a king. He bought expensive cars, motorcycles, and even airplanes. He dreamed bigger and bigger with every passing year. But behind the wealth was also a growing shadow. Violence was following Pablo wherever he went. Rivals were killed. Police were bribed. Judges were threatened. Everyone in Medellin began to realize that Pablo Escobar was not just another criminal. He was a rising force that could not be ignored. His family noticed the changes too. His mother worried about the path he was taking. but Pablo always told her he was building a future. He said he wanted to protect the family, but in truth, he was creating an empire of crime. At this stage of his life, Pablo was still climbing. The world outside Colombia did not yet know his name, but inside Medellin, people were already speaking about him in hushed voices. He was the young man who could make anything happen, the man who was both generous and ruthless, the man who had no limits. Nobody could have imagined then how far Pablo would go. From a boy who stole tombstones to a young man smuggling cars, he was now standing at the doorway of a new world, the world of cocaine. And once he entered that world, both his life and Colombia would never be the same again. Pablo Escobar was no longer a small thief in Medellin. By the mid-1970s, he had already built a name in the world of smuggling. He knew people who moved cars, cigarettes, and even appliances across borders. But Pablo was looking for something bigger. He wanted something that would make him richer and more powerful than any smuggler in Colombia. At that time, cocaine was beginning to spread in the United States. At first, it was only popular with wealthy people in nightclubs. But soon, the demand grew. Cocaine became the new drug of choice, and dealers were making fortunes. Pablo listened carefully to the stories of this business, and he decided that this was his future. He started by meeting local suppliers who grew coca plants. These plants were harvested in the jungles of South America and then processed into cocaine powder. Pablo learned the entire process, from the coca leaf to the final product that was sold in U.S. cities. He quickly realized that this drug was light, easy to move, and worth a huge amount of money. It was the perfect business for someone as ambitious as him. Pablo made connections with pilots who were willing to take the risk of flying small planes loaded with cocaine into the United States. At first, the shipments were small, hidden in regular cargo. But soon the business grew. Pablo built hidden laboratories in the jungle where workers processed coca leaves day and night. The air was filled with the smell of chemicals, as cocaine powder was produced in large amounts. He was smart in building his network. Pablo recruited loyal men who would not betray him. He paid them well, but he also ruled them with fear. Anyone who thought about stealing from him or speaking against him quickly disappeared. People began to say that Pablo had eyes everywhere. Nobody wanted to cross him. As the shipments increased, so did his profits. Every plane that left Colombia carried a fortune. In the United States, a kilo of cocaine could be sold for thousands of dollars. Pablo was earning more money than he had ever dreamed. He used this money to expand his operations. He bought more planes, more land, and more men to protect his growing empire. He also discovered another clever trick. Instead of flying cocaine only by planes, he used boats and even submarines. He worked with smugglers who hid cocaine in shipping containers, fruit crates, and even clothes. Pablo's genius was in making sure that the cocaine reached the U.S. no matter what. With his growing power, Pablo began to act like a businessman. He negotiated with other traffickers and sometimes worked with them to make larger shipments. But he always wanted control. He believed that if he could dominate the cocaine trade, he could dominate everything else too. By the late 1970s, Pablo was living a double life. To the outside world, he acted like a successful businessman. He bought land, cattle farms, and even started charities. But in the shadows, he was building what would soon become the Medellin Cartel, the most powerful drug cartel in history. His money started to buy influence. Police officers were bribed to look the other way. Judges were paid to release his men. Politicians accepted his donations. It was here that Pablo began to use his famous rule, plata o plomo, silver or lead. Either you take his money and stay quiet or you face death. Most people chose the silver because the lead meant a bullet. But even while he spread fear, Pablo never forgot to build his image as a hero to the poor. In the slums of Medellin, he gave away cash, built soccer fields, and paid for schools. The poor people began to love him. Mothers prayed for him, children cheered for him, and many believed he was on their side. They called him Don Pablo. For them, he was a man who gave hope when the government ignored them. The government, however, started to notice his growing power. Some police officers tried to stop him, but many were killed. Pablo had no mercy for anyone who stood against him. He believed that fear was the strongest weapon. The more people feared him, the safer his empire became. By now, Pablo was importing tons of cocaine into the United States every year. The money was unbelievable. He earned so much cash that he could not count it all. His men said they spent thousands of dollars each month just on rubber bands to wrap the money. In some cases, piles of cash rotted in storage because there was too much to hide. Still, Pablo wanted more. He dreamed not only of being the richest man, but also of being respected like a leader. He once told his cousin that he would become president of Colombia. He believed his money could buy him anything: power, loyalty, and even the love of the people. But his rise also brought enemies. Other smugglers were jealous of his success. Rival cartels were starting to form, and they did not want Pablo to control everything. Slowly, the seeds of future wars were being planted. For now, though, Pablo was still climbing higher. His empire was growing stronger every day. The Medellin cartel was almost ready to take full shape, and with it, Pablo Escobar was about to become the most feared and richest drug lord in the world. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was no longer just a smuggler. He had transformed into the leader of a powerful drug organization. This organization would soon be known all over the world as the Medellin Cartel. It was not just a group of criminals. It was an empire that controlled cocaine from the jungles of Colombia to the streets of Miami, New York, and Los Angeles. Pablo had the vision, but he also needed allies. He joined forces with other traffickers such as the Ochoa brothers and Carlos later. Together, they built a system so strong that it became almost impossible to break. Pablo was the leader, the mastermind, and the one who made the final decisions. The Medellin Cartel was born. The cartel worked like a huge company. At the bottom were farmers who grew coca leaves. Then came the workers in secret labs who turned the leaves into cocaine powder. Next were pilots, sailors, and smugglers who carried the product to the United States. Finally, there were dealers in U.S. cities who sold it on the streets. At every step, Pablo and his partners made sure they took their share. The numbers were shocking. By the mid-1980s, the Medellin Cartel controlled almost 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. Airplanes flew daily from Colombia to Florida. Sometimes they carried half a ton of cocaine in one flight. The cartel even used small submarines and hidden compartments in cargo ships. The business was so big that it was said Pablo earned millions every single day. With this fortune, Pablo Escobar became one of the richest men in the world. Forbes magazine even listed him among the wealthiest people alive. But his wealth was not like that of normal businessmen. His fortune came with blood, fear, and corruption. He used his money to build a lifestyle unlike anything Colombia had ever seen. Pablo bought a massive estate called Hacienda Nápoles. It was more than just a home. It was like a kingdom. The estate had a private zoo filled with elephants, giraffes, hippos, and exotic birds. There was a bullfighting ring, swimming pools, and even a private airstrip for his airplanes. Guests said the estate looked like a mix of paradise and fortress. At the same time, Pablo also expanded his influence in politics. He wanted respect, not only fear. In 1982, he was elected as a member of the Colombian Congress. Many people were shocked, but his popularity among the poor made it possible. He promised to fight poverty and give opportunities to the people. For a short time, it seemed like he could mix politics with his empire, but soon his true nature was exposed. Journalists began to write about his criminal past. One brave reporter, Guillermo Cano, openly accused him of being a drug trafficker. Judges and politicians also started to speak against him. Pablo's dream of being a respected leader began to crumble. Instead of backing down, he chose violence. This was the start of the dark side of the Medellin Cartel. Pablo believed in ruling through fear. He ordered assassinations of judges, police officers, and politicians who stood against him. Cars exploded in bombings. Bodies appeared in the streets. The Colombian government realized they were facing not just a criminal, but a warlord. Even in the middle of all this violence, Pablo never forgot his Robin Hood image. In Medellin's poorest neighborhoods, he built housing projects and soccer fields. Families who once lived in shacks suddenly had homes because of him. Children played in stadiums he had built. For the poor, he was a savior. For the government, he was a monster. The cartel grew so powerful that it could challenge the state itself. Pablo's motto, plata o plomo, silver or lead, spread everywhere. Police officers took bribes or faced death. Entire police units were afraid to act against him. Some became his allies, while others became his victims. By now, Pablo's reach went far beyond Colombia. His cocaine was flooding the United States. In Miami, drug wars broke out between dealers fighting over Pablo's product. The violence in American cities shocked the U.S. government. Billions of dollars were being spent on cocaine, and the Medellin cartel was at the center of it all. The U.S. and Colombian governments began to increase their efforts against him. New laws were passed, more police were sent, and extradition treaties were signed. Extradition meant that Colombian criminals could be sent to the United States to face trial. For Pablo, this was his biggest fear. He said many times that he preferred a grave in Colombia over a jail in America. To fight this threat, he launched even more violence. Judges who supported extradition were killed. Politicians who signed the treaties were assassinated. Entire courtrooms were attacked. Escobar wanted to send a clear message. Anyone who stood for extradition would die. While the world saw him as a terrorist, many in Medellin still supported him. They believed he was defending Colombia from foreign powers. They ignored the blood and focused on the homes and money he gave them. Pablo knew how to play both sides, but his empire was becoming harder to control. The larger the Medellin cartel grew, the more enemies it had. Rival cartels in Cali wanted their own share of the cocaine business. At the same time, the Colombian government, with U.S. support, was preparing for war against him. Pablo Escobar had reached the top. He was one of the richest men on earth, the leader of the most powerful drug cartel in history, and both loved and hated in his country. But the higher he rose, the more dangerous his fall would become. By the mid-1980s, Pablo Escobar had reached the height of his power. The Medellin cartel controlled most of the cocaine flowing into the United States. His fortune grew larger every day and his name was feared across Colombia. But with power came danger. Pablo believed that violence was the only way to keep control, and soon Colombia would drown in blood. Escobar's motto was simple: plata o plomo, silver or lead. It meant you could take his money or you could face his bullets. Judges, police officers, journalists, and politicians all knew this rule. Many chose the silver, but those who did not paid with their lives. The violence began to spread like a storm. Judges who tried to put cartel members in prison were assassinated. Journalists who spoke against Escobar were shot on the streets. Even presidential candidates became targets. In 1989, Luis Carlos Galán, who was running for president and strongly supported extradition, was killed by gunmen working for Escobar. The assassination shocked the nation, but it also showed that Escobar feared no one. Bombings became one of his favorite weapons. Cars filled with explosives exploded in cities. Police stations, government buildings, and even airplanes were attacked. In 1989, a bomb exploded on Avianca Flight 203, killing more than 100 people. Escobar had ordered the attack because he believed a rival or political enemy was on board. The innocent lives lost did not matter to him. His message was clear. He was willing to destroy anyone and anything. At the same time, Escobar also built an army of hitmen known as sicarios. These young men, often from poor neighborhoods, were paid to kill whoever Escobar pointed at. For many of them, working for Escobar meant money, respect, and a chance to escape poverty. They were loyal, but they were also ruthless. They shot judges in daylight, ambushed police cars, and spread fear everywhere. The Colombian police became one of Escobar's main enemies. Hundreds of officers were killed during this time. Escobar even placed bounties on their heads. A young sicario could earn money for every police officer he killed. Medellin became one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Families lived in fear, never knowing when violence would strike. But while Escobar used violence to crush his enemies, he continued to play the role of a hero to the poor. In Medellin, he built housing projects called barrios. Families who once lived in shacks now had homes. Children played in soccer fields he built. Some people said, "The government never gave us anything," but Pablo did. To many poor Colombians, he was a Robin Hood figure, a man who took from the rich system and gave to the people. This double image made him even harder to fight. The government saw him as a terrorist. The poor saw him as a savior. His influence spread through money, fear, and gifts. People protected him. sometimes hiding him from the police. But the violence was too big to ignore. The Colombian government, with help from the United States, launched a full war against Escobar and the Medellin Cartel. The U.S. sent agents from the DEA to support Colombian forces. New laws were passed to make extradition stronger. Special police units were created to hunt him down. Escobar responded with even more bloodshed. Politicians who supported the government's fight were killed. Entire families of police officers were targeted. The streets of Medellin became battlefields. Ordinary people lived in terror, caught between the government and Escobar's men. One of Escobar's most powerful tools was fear. He knew that killing one person could silence 100 others. When he killed a judge or a journalist, others became too afraid to speak. When he bombed a building, it reminded everyone that no place was safe. Fear was his weapon, and he used it well. Yet in the middle of this chaos, Escobar continued to live like a king. At Hacienda Nápoles, he held parties with famous people, politicians, and even priests. His private zoo grew larger. He bought luxury cars, airplanes, and art. For him, life was a mix of blood and gold. But the more violent he became, the more enemies he made. Rival cartels, especially the Cali cartel, began to rise. They wanted to take his place in the cocaine trade. They also hated his methods because his open violence brought too much attention. While the Cali cartel preferred bribery and quiet deals, Escobar preferred bombs and bullets. This difference would one day turn them into enemies. By the late 1980s, Colombia was at war. The Medellin cartel was not just a criminal group. It was like a rebel army. Escobar had his own soldiers, his own rules, and his own kingdom. But every bomb he ordered and every bullet his men fired pushed the government and his rivals to fight harder against him. Escobar had become one of the most powerful men in the world, but his power was built on violence and fear. He believed he was untouchable, yet the walls around him were slowly closing in. His fight with the government, his war with rival cartels, and his endless need for control were all leading him toward a dangerous future. By the late 1980s, Pablo Escobar was one of the most famous men in the world. To some, he was the most dangerous criminal alive. To others, he was a savior who gave hope to the poor. His life was full of contradictions. He was a killer and a benefactor, a villain and a hero, a man feared by governments but loved by many in Medellin. Escobar always understood that power was not only about money or violence. It was also about image. He knew how to make people see him as a protector instead of just a criminal. While he spread terror with bombings and assassinations, he also built homes, schools, and hospitals for the poor. He played both roles at the same time, the Robin Hood who gave and the warlord who killed. In Medellin, thousands of families lived in slums on the hillsides. Their houses were made of wood, tin, and cardboard. The government did little to help them. Escobar saw an opportunity. He built new housing projects complete with running water and electricity. He called them Medellin sin tugurios, Medellin without slums. Families who had lived in poverty for generations suddenly had proper homes. For them, Escobar was not a criminal. He was a savior. He also loved football and knew the people did too. He built soccer fields in poor neighborhoods and sponsored local teams. Children who once played barefoot in the dirt now had real fields with grass and uniforms. For many young people, Escobar was a hero. They shouted his name with pride, not fear. Escobar gave money for medical care, schools, and even church projects. Priests who saw him donate to their communities sometimes looked the other way when it came to his crimes. Mothers prayed for him, calling him Don Pablo. The poor protected him when the police came searching. They hid him, warned him, and kept his secrets. But outside Medellin, the picture was very different. In Bogotá, in Washington, and in the rest of the world, Escobar was a symbol of terror. His cartel's violence had left thousands dead. Judges, politicians, journalists, and police officers had been murdered. Bombings had destroyed buildings and even airplanes. Innocent people had lost their lives because of him. For the government, Escobar was a monster. This double image, hero to some, villain to others, made Escobar even more dangerous. He could not be easily defeated because many poor Colombians saw him as their only hope. When the government tried to capture him, entire neighborhoods would rise to protect him. For every man the police arrested, 100 others were willing to take his place. Escobar himself believed he was more than just a drug lord. He often spoke of himself as a politician, even a revolutionary. He said he wanted to make Colombia better, that he wanted to help the poor against the rich and corrupt government. But his actions told another story. His empire was built on cocaine, blood, and fear. Every house he built was paid for by drug money. Every soccer field was a shadow over thousands of deaths. Still, the poor did not see the full picture. They only saw the man who gave them homes, schools, and hope. For many of them, Escobar was a saint in life, even if history would remember him as a criminal. His Robin Hood image also protected him from the law. Police officers and soldiers often hesitated to enter neighborhoods that loved Escobar. They feared that the people would attack them, and sometimes they were right. Crowds would throw stones at the police and shield Escobar's men. The community was his armor. Escobar also used his wealth to play politics. He gave money to political campaigns, supported local leaders, and even dreamed of becoming president one day. But his past always followed him. The murder of journalists like Guillermo Cano and the killing of politicians like Luis Carlos Galan showed the world who Escobar truly was. No amount of charity could erase the blood on his hands. Even so, the contradiction continued. At Hacienda Nápoles, Escobar lived like a king. He had his own zoo with hippos, elephants, and rare birds. He hosted parties for celebrities, politicians, and athletes. He was admired by some of the richest and feared by some of the most powerful. But when he returned to Medellin, he walked among the poor who adored him, hugged their children, and handed out cash. It was a dangerous balance, Robin Hood and villain. But Escobar believed he could maintain it forever. He thought the poor would always protect him and that fear would always silence his enemies. Yet the truth was different. His violence had grown too big. His attacks on the government, his bombings, and his endless killings had turned him into Colombia's biggest threat. The poor might have loved him, but the state could no longer ignore him. The United States had joined the fight against him. Rival cartels also wanted him gone. His Robin Hood image was strong, but it could not save him from the storm that was coming. Escobar had reached a point where he was both loved and hated more than anyone else in Colombia. To some, he was a saint. To others, he was the devil himself. But soon, the war against him would become so intense that even the protection of the poor would not be enough. His life as both hero and villain was nearing its end. By the early 1990s, Pablo Escobar was the most wanted man in the world. His Medellin cartel had made him one of the richest criminals alive, but his violence had also made him the most dangerous. The Colombian government, with the full support of the United States, decided that Escobar had to be stopped at any cost. The war against him grew stronger each year. Police officers, soldiers, and special units were sent to hunt him down. The U.S. provided technology, intelligence, and training. DEA agents worked side by side with Colombian forces. Escobar knew he was surrounded by enemies, but he was not ready to give up. One of the biggest threats to him was extradition. Colombia had signed a treaty with the United States that allowed criminals to be sent there for trial. Escobar feared this more than death. He always said he preferred a grave in Colombia to a cell in America. To stop extradition, he ordered the killings of judges, politicians, and anyone who supported the law. He believed fear would protect him. But fear was no longer enough. His bombings, assassinations, and the deaths of innocent people had turned the entire country against him. Even those who once admired him began to see the destruction he brought. The poor still loved him, but many now feared being caught in the crossfire of his war. In 1991, Escobar made a surprising move. He agreed to surrender to the Colombian government, but only under one condition. He would not be extradited to the United States. The government, desperate to stop the bloodshed, accepted his deal. Pablo Escobar walked into custody, but it was not the end of his story. Escobar built his own prison, known as La Catedral. It was not like any normal prison. It was a luxury fortress designed by him. Inside, he had a large house, a soccer field, a bar, a waterfall, and even phones to run his business. He lived like a king behind bars. Guards were chosen by him. Visitors came freely, and he continued to control the Medellin cartel from inside. At first, people thought the war was over, but soon the truth came out. Escobar was still running his empire. He ordered hits, managed shipments, and grew richer even while in prison. Worse, when 2 cartel members betrayed him, he had them tortured and killed inside La Catedral. This act shocked the government. It proved that Escobar was not a prisoner. He was still the boss. The government decided they could no longer allow this. In July 1992, they planned to move Escobar to a regular prison. But when the authorities came for him, he escaped. Once again, Pablo Escobar was free. His escape began one of the most intense manhunts in history. Special police units, soldiers, and U.S. agents searched for him day and night. The hunt was called Search Block, and its only mission was to find Escobar. Helicopters flew over Medellin, houses were raided, and safe houses were destroyed. But Escobar was clever. He knew the city better than anyone. He used tunnels, safe houses, and his loyal followers to hide. Entire neighborhoods protected him. When the police came close, people would warn him. Children acted as messengers and poor families gave him shelter. He was always one step ahead. At the same time, Escobar faced a new enemy. A secret group called Los Pepes appeared. The name meant people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. It was made up of rival criminals, former associates, and enemies who wanted revenge. Los Pepes hunted Escobar's family, friends, and business partners. They killed anyone connected to him and burned down their houses. Many believed the group was secretly supported by the government and rival cartels. The manhunt grew more violent. Medellin became a city of fear. Gun battles broke out in the streets. Innocent people often became victims. Escobar's empire was shrinking. His money was harder to move. His allies were dying or betraying him. Even some of his closest men began to leave him, fearing Los Pepes and the police. Escobar himself began to live like a fugitive. He moved constantly from one safe house to another. He grew more paranoid, trusting fewer people each day. He stayed in small rooms, slept on hard beds, and ate simple meals. For a man who once lived like a king, it was a sharp fall. Still, Escobar never gave up control. He stayed in contact with his family, calling them often. These phone calls, however, became his biggest weakness. The police and U.S. agents used technology to trace his location whenever he spoke to his wife or children. Each call brought them closer. The world watched as the hunt continued. Newspapers followed every step. Some people hoped he would be caught and punished. Others still saw him as a hero and prayed for his safety. But everyone knew that Escobar's days were numbered. The man who once ruled Colombia with fear, who built palaces and zoos, who gave homes to the poor and killed presidents, was now running from rooftop to rooftop, hiding like a shadow in his own city. His story was reaching its final chapter. On December 2nd, 1993, Pablo Escobar's life came to its final day. For more than a year, he had been on the run after escaping from La Catedral. The police, U.S. DEA agents, and rival groups like Los Pepes were hunting him non-stop. His empire was broken, his money was harder to move, and many of his closest allies were gone. Yet Escobar still believed he could outsmart everyone. That morning in Medellin, Escobar made a mistake. He called his son by telephone to wish him a happy birthday. It was not the first time he had contacted his family, but the authorities were listening closely. The signal from his call gave away his location. Search Block, the special Colombian police unit, quickly moved toward the house where he was hiding. The house was small, a middle-class home in a neighborhood of Medellin. Escobar had been living quietly, moving between safe houses, always watching for danger. When the police surrounded the area, Escobar and one of his bodyguards, Álvaro de Jesús Agudelo, known as El Limón, tried to escape. They ran to the rooftop, jumping from one house to another. Gunfire broke out. The police fired, and Escobar fired back. The chase was fast and chaotic. Neighbors watched from their windows as one of the most wanted men in the world tried to flee across the roofs of Medellin. Shots echoed through the neighborhood. Within minutes, Escobar and his bodyguard were both dead. Escobar had been shot several times. One bullet hit him in the leg, another in his torso, and one in his ear. To this day, some believe he was killed by the police. Others think he shot himself to avoid being captured alive, staying true to his words that he would rather die in Colombia than face prison in the United States. The news spread quickly. Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, was dead at the age of 44. Crowds gathered around his body, which lay on the rooftop surrounded by police. Some people cheered, believing Colombia was finally free of his terror. Others cried, mourning the man they saw as a hero who had helped the poor. The next day, thousands of people attended his funeral in Medellin. The streets were filled with mourners. Mothers brought their children, saying goodbye to the man who had once given them homes and food. They wept as his coffin passed, as if they had lost a family member. For the poor, Escobar's death was not just the end of a criminal, it was the end of a protector. But for the government and much of the world, his death was a victory. The most feared drug lord in history was gone. His cartel began to collapse without his leadership. Rivals from the Cali Cartel and other groups quickly took over parts of the cocaine trade, but none would ever have the same power or influence as Escobar. Escobar's death did not end Colombia's problems with drugs or violence, but it did close one of the bloodiest chapters in the country's history. For years, his cartel had terrorized Colombia with assassinations, bombings, and kidnappings. His war against extradition had killed countless innocent people. His greed and ambition had stained the nation with blood. At the same time, his story left a strange legacy. In Medellin, his name remained alive in the neighborhoods he had built. Some people still spoke of him as a Robin Hood figure, the man who cared for the poor when no one else did. For them, his violence was forgiven because of his generosity. For others, he was nothing more than a ruthless killer who destroyed his country for money and power. Even after his death, Escobar's life continued to capture the world's attention. Books, documentaries, and films told his story. Some focused on his crimes, others on his strange double image as both a villain and a hero. His name became a symbol of the drug wars, of power built on fear, and of how one man could challenge entire nations. In the years that followed, Colombia worked hard to recover from the wounds Escobar left. The government strengthened its fight against cartels, and cities like Medellin began to change. But the scars remained. The memories of bombings, assassinations, and fear could not be erased easily. For Escobar's family, life after his death was full of hardship. His wife and children fled Colombia, changing their names to escape danger and shame. They carried the weight of his crimes, even though they had not chosen his path. His son later spoke about the pain of growing up as Escobar's child, trying to live a life far away from his father's shadow. Pablo Escobar's story was one of extremes. He rose from poverty to become one of the richest men in the world. He gave houses and schools to the poor, but he also filled streets with blood. He dreamed of being a president, but he ruled instead with bombs and bullets. His life showed the power of ambition, but also the destruction it brings when built on crime. On that rooftop in Medellin, the story of Pablo Escobar came to an end. But the legend of his life, half hero, half monster, lived on. To some, he would always be the Robin Hood of Medellin. To others, he would forever remain the king of cocaine, the man who turned fear into power and power into death. You've just seen another chilling story from the world of true crime, but there are many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to Crime Loom.